This episode contains language that may not be suitable for all listeners. Previously on Sugarland.
They were more concerned with getting Reggie to sign off on letting them move the bodies and continue construction than they were about actually paying these people any respect.
It was only as we were moving through this process and I was continually identifying individuals that were of African American ancestry, it started to become very clear what it is we were working with.
The attorney said, district cannot maintain a cemetery. So what are your options at that point?
It's the district's belief that would be to petition the court for authority to reinter them.
Does anyone on the task force disagree with the concept of the DNA testing? Everyone in agreement? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
It's 1991 in Lower Manhattan. The federal government's about to break ground on a 34-story office building when they make a massive discovery. An estimated 15,000 bodies buried just 30 feet beneath the city. The remains of free and enslaved Africans who'd lived and worked in New York in the 1600s and 1700s. Just like in Sugarland, this shouldn't have come as a surprise. The New York landowners were warned there could be bodies on that site, but they still pushed forward with construction. Over the course of a year, more than 400 skeletons are unearthed and stored in boxes. Is any of this sounding familiar?
Black New Yorkers, activists, and academics push for construction to stop, for the site to be preserved, the remains respected. And though it takes a whole year and an intervention from President George H.W. Bush, their protests are effective. The original archaeologists working on the site are replaced with scholars from Howard University, a highly regarded, historically Black research institution.
You know, the Black Harvard.
Architects redesigned the building to eliminate the section where bodies remain in place, and $3 million are set aside for a national memorial.
Renowned physical anthropologist Michael Blakey steps in as project director. As a Black man himself, Blakey told us he felt it was critical to consult with members of the Black community and possible descendants of the deceased before starting his research. He calls this group the descendant community.
It's people from that area, Black people from that area, whose families were enslaved there, and who show that they care. Because once that happens, we have the ethical obligation of not doing them harm. Once they show that they care, they can be harmed.
Not only did Blakey want the descendant community's blessing to conduct research on the site and the remains, he also wanted them to decide what, if any, studies would be done.
The ethical term that applies best for me is informed consent. They must be informed, and they give consent, which means they can say no to research. That's everybody's right.
But the descendant community didn't say no. In fact, Blakey says the questions they asked were better than any the researchers could have come up with on their own.
We did the research, but they posed the question. What resulted there is 2,500 pages, the most sophisticated bioarchaeological reports ever produced.
Years later, in Sugarland, Reginald Moore learns about Blakey's research, and it convinces him that the descendants of the Sugarland 95 should get to decide how their ancestors' remains are handled and memorialized too.
This is part 3 of Sugarland, an investigative podcast series presented by the Texas Newsroom. We're your hosts, Naomi Reed
and Brittany Martin.
We wanted to tell you about the New York African Burial Ground because it could have served as a model for Fort Bend ISD. They could have learned from New York's mistakes and triumphs. It likely would have saved them a lot of time, energy, and probably money too. But the district did things their own way.
We left off last episode in September of 2018. The city had just convened a task force to gauge public opinion about issues related to the cemetery. At the end of their first meeting, the task force voted unanimously to support DNA analysis of the remains.
What no one knew then was that this would be one of the last times the city, the school district, and the task force would see eye to eye on anything.
The fight to control these 95 bodies turned out to be far more contentious than anyone involved could have imagined. It's a long and complicated saga, so we've chosen to explain it by using a mildly clumsy boxing metaphor.
Please forgive us.
In one corner, we have the Fort Bend Independent School District, What a fancy new career and technical center to finish. And in the other corner, we have the descendant community, or at least the people who wanted the descendant community to have control, because remember, the 95 bodies still hadn't been identified.
So, Fortbin ISD versus the descendants. Let's go.
There's the bell for round one.
The task force entered the ring on behalf of the descendant community.
Yes, round one, and both fighters come out warily.
After everyone voted to support DNA analysis at the first task force meeting, Reggie's friend Jay Jenkins said he and other task force members assumed that's what would happen next.
We thought, they exhumed the bodies, they had taken the DNA samples, and the next step was going to be identify those DNA samples and find descendants and go from there.
But by the second meeting, Jay suspected trouble.
So when they started talking about, we got to move the bodies, on this task force, we were suspicious.
When they arrived, they were split into two committees. One was supposed to find places where they could rebury the bodies, and the other was asked to design a memorial service and figure out what the cemetery should look like.
The task force continued to meet throughout September 2018 and the first half of October. The Burial Location Committee presented the group with a few different options. Option 1, move the bodies to the old Imperial Farm Cemetery. That's the nearby convict cemetery the city already owned. Option 2, move them to another site, like the prison cemetery in Huntsville. Option 3, rebury the bodies where they were found. Or Option 4, none of the above. And as far as the task force knew, all of those scenarios were still on the table.
But then...
Next, we have consideration and approval of an interlocal agreement with the City of Sugar Land regarding the discovery of human remains at the James Reese CTE Center.
On October 15th, Fortbin ISD's Board of Trustees voted to formalize an agreement they'd made with the city to move the bodies to the old Imperial Farm Cemetery.
Mr. President, I move to approve action item 12B1 as presented.
Please vote. Motion passes. Next up, we have future board meeting agenda items.
Reggie was at that school board meeting, and the vote took him and the rest of the task force by surprise. They were set to meet again just 2 days later, supposedly to continue discussing where the bodies should be buried. Reggie called Jay on his way out.
So they passed a memorandum of understanding, and the city passes theirs. This is a done deal. It doesn't matter what the task force is talking about. All right, so we're going to have to manipulate this thing some kind of way and try to leverage, all right?
Leverage to stop or at the very least hit pause on the district's plan to move the bodies. Before the task force met again, Reggie and Jay did some pre-gaming.
I remember Reggie and I sitting at Reggie's house for 3 hours before that meeting, just going through everything, trying to figure out, something.
The task force members showed up at the meeting and played the only card they had left. They called for a vote.
And despite, at the beginning of that meeting, not being given an option to leave the bodies where they were, the task force voted 17 or whatever to 1 to leave the bodies where they were, with Veronica Sofer from the school district being the only no.
We don't know the actual vote count because the city says they didn't record that meeting. But regardless, it seems like the task force's message was clear. They didn't want the bodies to be moved. But that didn't persuade the school district to change course. Their head of design and construction estimated that the archaeological work had already cost them $5 million, and that delaying the agreement with the city would cost them an additional $175,000 per month.
There was a lot of frustration amongst people that served on the task force. Why are you even asking us to come out here and give our time if you're not listening to our voice?
So a few of the task force members decided to make their case to the Sugar Land City Council instead.
My name is Samuel Collins III.
Sam Collins is a financial consultant by day, but in his spare time, he's an independent historian and advisor for the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
I recently served on your task force with regards to the Sugar Land 95. I resigned last week before the last meeting because after noticing the Fort Bend ISD interlocal agreement, it appeared that the task force had been formed only to rubber stamp what the city and Fort Bend ISD had already agreed to.
Sam is often the calm voice of reason in any room, always appealing to everyone's better nature. He brought that same attitude to City Hall.
I want the City Council to take seriously the advice that we have tried to give to slow down, reconsider the interlocal agreement, and not vote for it tonight.
And yet, just like the school district had the week before, the city council went ahead with the vote.
With that, I'll make the motion to approve the agreement. I've got a motion, I've got a second. Any further discussion? You vote at this time, please. And it passes a vote of 6-0 with one of the council members absent. Thank you, Doug. Reginald, thank Mr. Collins. Ma'am, thank you.
Well, that's the end of round one. On the whole, it's a really fine example of brilliant, thrilling championship boxing.
And with that, round 1 goes to Fort Bend ISD.
Now, let's have a look at round 2.
With the school district and the city formally in agreement, there was only one more hurdle Fort Bend ISD had to clear before they could move the bodies. They needed permission from a judge.
Hello?
Hi, Judge Shoemake?
Yes.
Hi, this is Brittany Martin.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm so glad you called me. I was worried I'd never find you. This is Judge James H. Shoemake, the judge who presided over the Fort Bend ISD case. He became a traveling judge after losing his bid for re-election in 2020, which made him very hard to track down. When we finally connected, he had just been diagnosed with COVID, so we made a plan to meet up once he felt better.
And I coughed so much for such a long period of time that's taken my voice.
Using all the voice he had left, Shoemake told us he took on Fort Bend ISD's case in November 2018. And unlike a regular courtroom drama where two sides battle it out in front of a judge and a jury, Fort Bend ISD was the only party in this case. Their lawyer went to court and asked Judge Shoemake for permission to move the bodies, hoping he would sign off on the plan right then and there. But instead, Reggie approached the bench. This is Reggie's friend Jay again.
That was one of those times where it was good that I wasn't there, because I probably would have told him that you can't just stand up from the crowd in court and give your opinion, but he did, and part of that was because the judge knew who he was, right? And the judge knew that he probably did have some thoughts and opinions on it.
Reggie and other community members told him he thought the descendants of the 95 should be the ones to decide if, when, and where they were moved.
Remember, the only reason Judge Shoemake was involved in this was because the school district said the identities of the Sugar Land 95 were, quote, unknown and cannot be reasonably determined. But that wasn't entirely true. Here's what Fort Bend ISD's own archaeologist, Rain Clark, said at a public meeting 2 whole months before this court hearing.
We have been finding specific information about those that died at Ellis Camp Number 1. And at this point, we have 6 individuals by name, and we have a lot of information about those individuals.
Ellis Camp Number 1 was the shorthand name of one of the convict camps that operated on this land in the 1880s and 90s. Rain said he and his team found those 6 names while sifting through old Texas prison records, and that they were, quote, almost undoubtedly buried on the site of the James Reese Career and Technical Center.
They were giving mixed signals. We don't know who's here, but we do know who's here.
That concerned Judge Shoemake.
Well, because of the circumstances, I wasn't going to sign off on doing very much without having more information.
The judge decided not to rule on the case just yet. Instead, he appointed a local attorney to help him determine what the district knew about the identities of the Sugar Land 95 and what information was still out there. Reggie called Jay to fill him in.
Hey, Jay, this Reg, man. Checking with you. Want to give you an update. Man, everything went well today. He did not grant them the authority to approve the move to bodies today. Everything went just on point. It was just right on point. God got his hands on it. The judge was fantastic.
Team Descendants had Fort Bend ISD on the ropes.
For sure. The district's plans were entirely dependent on the judge granting them permission to move the bodies. Construction had been halted in and around the cemetery, but they were still building the rest of the school. By the time they went to court, the district was nearing a crucial deadline.
If they wanted to open any part of the school by August 2019, which they did, they needed to finalize the design.
One wing of the building was supposed to sit right on top of the cemetery, and the district said eliminating that wing would cost $18 million. If they couldn't estimate when the school would be done or what the final design would look like, they couldn't let students enroll in classes or hire instructors. They were out of time.
Over into a corner, and then they back away again.
So Fort Bend ISD swung back with all their might.
Oh, wasn't that a beauty?
Their lawyers objected to having a local attorney appointed to look at the case. They met with the county attorney and tried to dissuade him from getting involved. They also filed this thing called a writ of mandamus, which basically means Fort Bend ISD went to a higher court judge and said, hey, Judge Shoemake appointed someone to meddle in our case and he shouldn't have. But Judge Shoemake wasn't fazed and reappointed the local attorney. He said he just wanted to know what information the district had and if identifying the 95 was anywhere in the realm of possibility.
That's all they had to do was schedule a hearing, call their experts in, put their evidence on, and say at the end, do you know who's there from what you have? No. Do you think you would know given more time and effort? No. Okay, that pretty well takes care of it. But they didn't do that.
What we know now is that the district had a growing list of names.
Names of men who died on the convict lease plantations that operated on that land from the 1870s to about 1912.
Rain or the district could have hired a genealogist to build out family trees for each of the men on that list and find their living descendants. But that would have taken a lot of time and a lot of work. Plus, there was no guarantee the names they found would actually match the people buried on the site.
But was, or is that even really a problem? Even if DNA later proved that a person's ancestor wasn't one of the 95, their perspective is still valuable. They still carry the weight of this legacy, and their lived experience would be similar to the 95's biological descendants. One thing I've learned as an anthropologist, Black people are highly silenced in the archives. Our names weren't recorded and documents were destroyed. So a lot of times, descendant gets more of a symbolic meaning. It doesn't have to be, or it can't be matched in this kind of scientific way.
All that to say, the school district's archaeologist had those names, and neither he nor the district gave them to the judge. Fort Bend ISD could have done more to consult with a representative descendant community
if they wanted to take the time and expend that energy. But they either didn't know that, or as task force member Sam Collins came to believe, they just didn't want to.
I think they were really trying to get through this without identifying any descendants and just wanted to get those bodies back in the ground and get that school built. By identifying descendants, now you're bringing more people onto the table that may not agree with you. So let's really not find those folks.
As the court case dragged on, pressure was mounting against the district's plan to move the bodies.
An injustice has been perpetrated, but we have an opportunity to right a wrong.
This is Congressman Al Green, a Democrat who represents parts of Houston and Missouri City. In February 2019, Green and half a dozen other elected officials sent a letter to Fort Bend ISD urging them not to relocate the Sugar Land 95.
This is an opportunity for us to show the world that we will respect the remains of people regardless as to who they are, regardless as to what their station in life was, regardless as to where they are found. We're going to respect them, and we're going to treat them with dignity. Let's make a positive difference and do justice by the Sugar Land 95.
Green and the others, including state lawmakers and several officials from Fort Bend County, said they would attend the next school board meeting to discuss alternatives to the district's plan.
And maybe it was the political pressure, or maybe it just seemed like the quickest way forward. But on February 18th, 2019, almost exactly 1 year after the first bones were discovered, the school district tapped out.
The time is 6:50 p.m., and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum, and the meeting has been duly called, and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law.
At the school board meeting that night, the trustees met in private for nearly an hour and a half.
What I remember most about this whole thing probably is the night in closed session with the board. I'm not going to.
This is former Fort Bend ISD Superintendent Charles Dupree.
I still remember the conversation and the final decision where the board and it was just kind of this aha. Everybody realized we can't do anything on that site. We've got to leave it alone. We have to leave it untouched. It's like all of a sudden it just crystallized that we can finish this building, but we're going to have to modify the plans and turn that space into some sort of memorial. We have to do that. And everybody in the room was like, we do. There's no option.
Fort Bend ISD would stop trying to move the bodies and instead work out a new deal to transfer ownership of the cemetery to Fort Bend County.
The district's overarching theme was if you, county, can run this cemetery legally, then you can take it and you can reinter the remains where they came from in the cemetery, and you'll take it and manage it.
The bodies could stay.
And there is the end of round 2.
And so round 2 goes to the descendants.
Reginald Moore was thrilled. After a full year of back and forth, he was so relieved the Sugarland 95 were going to be returned to their original resting place. And he had faith that Fort Bend County would work with him to properly memorialize and dignify the 95.
He thanked Superintendent Dupree and the school board trustees for changing their minds.
All of us at the Conflict Leasing and Labor Project are proud to be a part of this change of heart, this desire to work together.
Then Dupree got to work hammering out the details with the county.
It was just a negotiation process. The district's objective was to have a good partnership with the county, and we were happy to pay a fair, reasonable amount for the work that they were going to have to do to take on the cemetery, to transfer it from us to them.
All through the spring and summer of 2019, construction crews worked to finish the newly redesigned school, and the county and the school district negotiated. Finally, in July, they struck a deal. Fort Bend ISD announced it would donate 10 acres of land, including the cemetery, and $1 million to the county.
Honestly, it seems like everybody was on board for this plan, especially Reggie. Here he is thanking the county commissioners at a public meeting.
I think the county means well, and thank y'all for standing out and standing up.
But unfortunately, that moment of harmony was short-lived.
Round 3 coming right up. Back in the center of the ring.
Since Fort Bend ISD no longer planned to move the bodies, they went back to Judge Shoemake to drop their court case in July 2019. But he wouldn't let them. He maintained that Fort Bend ISD needed his permission to do anything regarding the cemetery, including reburying the bodies where they were found. Deal aside, he still wanted answers.
The district, you'll remember, hadn't yet shared the list of names it had been compiling, or anything on the possible identities of the Sugarland 95.
They wouldn't turn loose any of the information whatsoever. And that tells you something about their motivation and their honesty.
Judge Shoemake appointed local attorney Scott West to serve as guardian ad litem for the 95 and their descendants, which basically made him their lawyer.
And Scott tried to get in there and get some things done, I believe. But the school district by that time had made up their mind they wanted out.
Scott West filed a motion to stop the district from reburying the bodies without court approval and asked the appeals court to rehear the case, requests which were ultimately not granted. He also made his case to the county commissioners.
Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Scott West. I've been a Fort Bend County resident for almost 30 years. I care about this county with all of my heart. You cannot allow the school district to have a one-sided, dark deal without the light and the transparency of the district court's approval.
He argued it would be like hiring referees for a football game and then firing them at halftime and letting the school district decide for themselves who was offsides or who committed pass interference.
Judge Shoemake is the referee for this entire procedure. They didn't have the permission and authority to remove the bodies without the district court's approval, and they don't have permission to reinter the bodies without district court approval.
The county commissioners agreed. After hearing all that, they weren't willing to move forward without the judge's permission. That's when their deal with the school district started falling apart. Here's Robert Scamardo, Fort Bend ISD's attorney.
Negotiations stalled over the question of whether court approval was needed to rebury the remains where they were found. The district's position was that since we were no longer seeking the court's permission to remove the remains or the cemetery designation, it was unnecessary.
So just to rewind it back a bit, Fort Bend ISD originally made a deal with the city to move the bodies, but Judge Shoemake said he wanted to know more about who the 95 were before he would give them permission to do it.
Instead of providing that information, Fort Bend ISD made a new deal with the county to rebury the bodies where they were found.
But again, Judge Shoemake wanted to know more about who the 95 were before he signed off. So the district pivoted yet again. In September 2019, Dupree made this announcement at a school board meeting.
We are thankful to the county for stepping forward and joining us for possible future memorialization. However, to be clear, with or without an agreement with the county, our plan is to reinter these individuals at the site at which they were found.
No city, no county, no problem. The school district would just do it themselves.
Our legal guidance said we were on solid footing and that we would just deal with it, within the courts if there was any negative repercussions.
So they moved forward alone.
First on the agenda tonight for your review is a contract for the reinterment services.
Near the end of September, the school board met to consider a contract with a local funeral home to rebury the bodies. Reggie, Sam Collins, and others from the task force attended that meeting and asked the district not to reinter the 95 without first identifying them and consulting with their descendants. Here's task force member Swatara Olushola.
For a district to feel comfortable with making end-all be-all decisions regarding these victims of crimes against humanity without the community, without their families, without their names, against the wishes of the court is disgusting to me, and you should be ashamed of yourselves.
Their pleas weren't heeded. The school district approved the contract with the funeral home and set a date for a public memorial service.
It didn't seem like there was any way Team Descendants could get back up off the mat. But Jay said Reggie, at least, was still swinging.
Reggie had a lawyer issue a cease and desist order to the school district to not use his name or likeness in any of the stuff that they were putting on.
Reggie didn't want anyone to think he supported the school district's plan to rebury the bodies, not without first consulting with descendants. But Dupree maintained the district was in the right.
There just comes a point where, as a leader, you've got to say, this is what we're doing and this is why. This is our property. We uncovered it, and you may not agree, but we're going to do what's right.
On November 17, 2019, the district hosted a Blessing the Ground ceremony ahead of their reburial, which was scheduled to take place over the next few weeks. Several dozen people gathered at the James Reese Career and Technical Center to sing hymns, light candles, and ring a bell to memorialize the 95. Reggie didn't attend, but others showed up to protest and interrupted Dupree's remarks.
Who is the Sugar Land 95?
Test the DNA. Find the families.
Despite the protests, Dupree maintains that Fort Bend residents largely supported the district's decisions. I asked him about this.
A lot of the people who wanted a voice at the table were not members of our Fort Bend area, and even lived in the county.
Was there ever a moment where you said, okay, maybe they're not, land-owning members of Fort Bend County, but they are Black people from the Houston area. Maybe this is not just to be loud and make trouble. Maybe they want to make sure that you do the right thing.
I met with all of these individuals, but then as things escalated, there was more desire to control than to partner and to have their voice heard. They wanted to take over the process. And when we said, well, thank you, we're happy to partner and have conversations and work with you, but no, this is our responsibility and we're going to maintain that, then the relationships would go south.
Control. That's what it always comes back to, doesn't it? Who gets to control these bodies? Who gets to tell this story?
The essential problem is power. It always has been, and it applies to cemeteries as to anything else.
This is Michael Blakey again, the researcher who led the New York African Burial Ground Project. For him, the answer to these questions is simple.
These remains do not belong to anyone other than their descendants. They do not belong to you. You don't own them. You have no rights to them.
But that's just not how things played out here.
The final blow in our metaphorical boxing match came on the day before Thanksgiving in 2019, when Jay got this voicemail from Reggie.
Hey Jay, this Reg, get a chance, man. Call me back. They putting those balls, they probably warn them in the ground as we speak. They putting those bodies in there. Give me a call. Talk to you later. Bye.
He was upset and a little hard to understand, but he was calling to tell Jay that Fort Bend ISD had started reburying the bodies. Reggie had gone to the James Reese Career and Technical Center hoping to monitor the reburial, but he was ordered to leave by police officers at the school.
I remember talking to him when they were burying the bodies and being like, Marilyn and I do not want to come pick you up at jail tonight. So I said, if you want me to come out there and you and me can lay in front of the bulldozers or whatever they're doing, then I'll do that. But it's still not going to stop them. And if you get arrested, it's not going to be a good Thanksgiving for you tomorrow.
Reggie wasn't one to leave things alone, though. He returned to the school later that day, and this time the police were ready. According to a report filed by Fort Bend ISD police officer Robbie Hilliard III, he was dispatched there and made aware of a, quote, suspicious black male attempting to take photos of the Sugarland 95 gravesite.
Hilliard usually worked at Christa McAuliffe Middle School, a predominantly black and Hispanic campus over 20 minutes away from the James Reese Center. It's not clear why he was dispatched there that day. Hilliard and another officer were staged on opposite ends of the parking lot when Reggie returned. The other officer then pulled up behind Reggie's truck, so Reggie circled the parking lot and left. Hilliard then got a call from his sergeant instructing him to issue Reggie a criminal trespass warning. So he followed Reggie out of the parking lot, down the street, and pulled him over. Hilliard wrote that Reggie said, "I don't blame you," and quote, "You're just doing your job. They sent you brothers out here so they would not have to send a white officer because they don't want the white officers to look like they're racist. I've been waiting for this ticket. Please believe me."
And with that, Fort Bend ISD had won. Here's how Reggie's wife Marilyn remembers that day.
He was upset when he came home, but I didn't know what had happened.
Okay.
Because as far as I knew, he didn't go over there.
He didn't tell you?
He didn't tell me a lot of stuff. I'm trying to remember if he told me or I heard him telling Jay. Oh my. That's how I learned a lot of things, just by overhearing conversations.
We laughed at the memory, but in hindsight, that day actually marked the beginning of the end for Reggie. Here's his friend Jay again.
Like when he was in the fight, like he was fit as a fiddle, but as soon as it, became clear that like the school district didn't give a shit what anybody said. They were going to do what they wanted to do because they owned the land and they wanted to do it. You could tell like a shift. He was bummed out more, and then you could just tell that like it broke his spirit a little bit for them to, I don't think he expected them to go through with it. And it just, the futility of what can we do about it?
Marilyn said she noticed the same sense of defeat.
Yeah, it affected him, and he basically told me, and I could see him, I don't want to say not caring, but letting his health slide.
Next time on Sugarland.
Dr. Keeney said it's going to be people guilty of doing wrong. And it's going to be also people guilty of doing nothing. Are we complacent? Are we freedom fighters?
It's like a constant dripping that breaks you too over time. And the work of many activists, their physical health, their mental health, it suffers from having to do the work.
And we were trying to think of ways to, continue the fight. But I could just tell when I talked to him that he was getting weaker.
She asked me, "Are you at the hospital?" I said, "No." And then she said, "How soon can you get here?"
Sugarland is a production of the Texas Newsroom and was completed with the support of a grant from Columbia University's Ira A. Littman Center for Journalism and Civil and Human Rights, with funding provided by Arnold Ventures, and a grant from the Convict Leasing and Labor Project. Sugarland is written and reported by Brittany Martin and Naomi Reed. Our editor is Rachel Osier Lindley. Engineering and sound design by Jacob Rosati. Fact-checking by Billy Brennan. Audio editing by Bennett Smith. Music by Jerron Marshall. Recording engineering by Jake Perlman. Production help from Rafa Fariha. The Texas Newsroom is a public radio journalism collaboration that includes NPR, KERA in North Texas, Houston Public Media, KUT in Austin, Texas Public Radio in San Antonio, and other stations across the state. Corey McLagan is the statewide managing editor. The Texas Newsroom received support for Sugarland from Frontline's Local Journalism Initiative, which is funded by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Visit sugarlandpodcast.com to learn more about everything we discuss in this series.